Welcome to My Body, My Bump, My Baby, where we help women be empowered, intentional mothers. This podcast is best enjoyed sipping tea or taking a stroll in nature. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be substituted for professional psychological or medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, midwife, or other qualified health provider with any questions about your personal situation, health, or medical condition.
Welcome back to My Body, My Bump, My Baby. Thank you all for joining us again today. Today we will be discussing what is an induction. We'll be getting into some pieces around what are the different types of induction, what's a pharmaceutical induction versus a non-pharmaceutical induction, how common is it in the U.S., and why might your OB be recommending it. We have, in the prenatal yoga classes that we offer here at Enzo, or that B offers at Enzo, we oftentimes hear a lot of women coming in around 37 weeks saying things like, my doctor thinks we should schedule an induction around 39 or 40 weeks.
Yeah, it's really common. It's actually kind of shocking how common it is. And recently I'm noticing that women are coming in even earlier than 37 weeks. Like I have had women coming in like late second trimester, where their OB is already suggesting and kind of like planting those seeds about induction for whatever reason.
Have you noticed a change in trends around this in the years that you've been in this field?
You know what? It's kind of interesting. I would say that Colorado Springs is pretty progressive when it comes to birth in comparison to some other states where I have friends that are birth workers. But it's always been one of those things that, in my opinion, happens way too often for non-medical reasons. I hear it a lot. I would say that very close to 50% of the ladies that come through Enzo at some point will have a conversation with their OB about induction. And quite honestly, the reason that is, in my mind, is because we have a lot of women that come to Enzo that do not birth at hospitals. We have a lot of women who birth at a birth center or a home birth. So I actually think the number would be higher than 50%.
When we were looking at data for this, and we didn't write this down, so this is just off the cuff, but they talked about those numbers, and they also talked about the women in different classes or education classes that made the choice for induction or said no to induction versus those that did say yes. And that number of women being asked was over that 50% mark. I do remember that.
And that makes sense to me. I would expect it to be more than 50%. Basically, if you are in a hospital, I would say that there is a very high percentage probability that you will be posed with the potential of making a decision about induction.
And one of the things that we did, I mean, we'll link this in the show notes, but we did look into the rate of induction in the U.S., which it has risen from 9.6% in 1990 to 25.7% in 2018, which is, and it includes 31.7% of first-time birthers. That's interesting.
This is a very interesting number. We actually we scoured the internet for data on this, and it actually was very difficult to find.
And other countries. We wanted to compare, as usual, like we do to other countries, and we could find zilch.
Right. Nothing. What is the United States report card compared to what everybody else is doing? And we couldn't find anything. And one of the reasons is because, reporting is based state by state here in the United States, and so not all states require this kind of reporting. So, honestly, these numbers are really high, and I feel like they could potentially be a lot higher because I think that these are not fully reported across the entirety of the United States.
And they're pharmaceutical.
right, this would be pharmaceutical induction. And there are other forms of intervention that are done with the intent of induction that are not pharmaceutical. So they would actually be in this class of induction, but it wouldn't be measured.
Mm-hmm. So let's back up a little bit to just the basics of someone listening might be thinking, what is an induction?
Yeah, what is an induction? I'm not Googling an answer. I'm giving you B's birth worker definition.
Yeah, that's great. This is a real podcast.
I would say that an induction is whenever a support OB or midwife is doing something to have a labor begin or force a labor to begin when the body is not doing it naturally on its own. And those can kind of be broken up into different classes. So there is a pharmaceutical induction. This is what the numbers that we were just talking about represent. Those are pharmaceutical inductions, and those always happen in hospitals. And then there are non-pharmaceutical inductions, and they're still an induction, even though they are non-pharmaceutical, because we're trying to get the body to do something that it's not doing on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That was a very great definition, because ACOG's definition is labor induction is the use of medications or other methods to bring on or induce labor.
There you go.
Breaking it down very simply. They don't go into the details specifically of it. And so there's the pharmaceutical piece of induction. There's the non-pharmaceutical piece as well that you mentioned, both pieces of those. So let's before we dig into what the various types of induction are, why might OBs be recommending inductions for women's?
Yeah.
Why do we see it so often, especially early?
There are so many reasons. And, I'll just, when in doubt, always have a conversation with your medical provider. They are the one who knows you. They know your medical history. And, we're just kind of, in this podcast, we're dealing with averages and generalizations. So,
and planting seeds for you to ask the questions.
Right.
Yeah, so ask those questions to your provider.
But there are a lot of reasons that a provider might be recommending induction, and some are valid medical reasons, and then some are actually not medical reasons. And I think this is very important to remember, because I think that sometimes when we go to our provider, we make an assumption that everything that we're being told or everything that is being recommended is because it's necessary and required for the health of my baby and the health of myself. And that's not always true, unfortunately.
And I mean, I've even learned things after my first pregnancy. I've learned things now that I had still assumed were required, or in some way had been told they were required.
Like
and
what? I'm curious.
That I could have a second group B strep test, and that the hospital wouldn't just accept the first one.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Things like that. It's really interesting. And in even the gestational diabetes scan, it's not required.
Right. Right. That's
here in the state of Colorado.
That goes back to that whole secret menu options for your birth.
I mean, I thought the secret menu options were I could do different types of tests,
right?
Like finger pricks or the fresh chest instead of the glucose. But wow,
right, right.
I guess if I had asked questions, but if I had kept digging on my own, I would have found it.
I think sometimes you have to actually dig on your own, and sometimes the answer isn't given straight.
Yeah. Exactly. And that just goes back to even when you pick a provider that you absolutely love, there's still the piece of you still need to do. You need to do your homework. Because you can't just, you fully can trust yourself. That's about it.
Right. So I guess, some reasons are medical reasons. So, one really good reason, in my opinion, to have an induction is if you have been diagnosed with preeclampsia. That's a serious condition. You don't play with that. Why? Don't do that. So yes, induction in that in that case. If for some reason there's something interesting happening with baby and they think it's, the safest thing for baby to come early, then yes.
Placenta challenges.
There's a big list. We couldn't get into all of them, and they're all unique, but
so why would they recommend it if it's not medically? Like, what are some recommendations for a non-medical induction? I have one in my head.
There's the gray too. So let's make sure we hit the gray. So
Okay.
there's medical reasons this is needed. There is non-medical reasons definitely not needed. And then there's the ones where
maybe ask
why. Right. They're in the gray.
It's like the little kid asking why.
So the non-medical reasons, and this is the most common, is, when you're pregnant, you want to build a relationship with your provider, and you want to feel safe and confident with them because you're going to do something that is really big and really intimate. Yeah. And really letting down your guard in front of this person. So it's important to have that relationship. And so you build this relationship over, 9 months of your pregnancy. And then you find out that very close to your due date, your provider is on vacation. And so oftentimes the provider will say, hey, you know what, Hannah, I love you. We're so good together. But I'm going to be on vacation for your due date, and I really want to catch your baby, and I know you want me to catch your baby. And so this is an option. If you want to do it, let's just schedule it, make sure baby comes before I leave. A lot of mamas will opt in for that, and I get it, because when it's posed that way, in my opinion, it makes a lot of sense. But I don't
Emotionally.
Yes, but I don't think they know really what this thing looks like.
That's not a gray area. I see that as a non-medical.
That's non-medical.
Yeah, that's a non-medical area. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. But when you're induced, they're not always the ones on call either.
Right.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. Well, and let's just say this, because I don't know that everybody knows this, but even if you're not induced, even if you go into labor naturally, there's no guarantee that your provider is going to be the one, right? And so when you're thinking about that, and you're thinking about electing an induction, does it make sense? Maybe, but also maybe not. And I think the way you determine it is you need to know all the facts. I think you need to understand what induction entails, what it looks like, and kind of weigh that against how you're feeling about the situation. But most of the time, it's whoever in that practice is on call is the person who's going to be there to catch. Doesn't necessarily mean it's your favorite one.
And usually you've rotated through the providers in the practice, whether they're midwives or whether they're OBs, to have experience with each of them. But you make a good point. There's not a guarantee, because we can't expect a doctor or midwife to also be on call 24/7, literally.
Gray. Now, the grays, there's so many grays. This is where we have to watch ourselves. So this is, and, people can rage at me if they want to later.
This is where you need to make decisions for yourself and do the research and talk with your provider and talk with your Wise Women network.
But a gray. If you are a first-time mom, so first pregnancy, they call that PRIMIP. If you're a PRIMIP, and let's say you're over 35, it is very common for a provider to begin to discuss induction in first trimester. Now, I will tell you right now, there is no medical indication that says you absolutely need to have an induction when you are in first trimester due to age. There's no way to know that at that moment. And so that's a gray. Now, if you were like further along in pregnancy and they were doing testing and that testing showed that maybe, the placenta was aging, maybe the placenta was not functioning as well as it should, then yes, that is an indication for induction due to advanced maternal age. But that's not the case when you're in first trimester.
No.
Right? But they're kind of prepping you.
It's the conditioning
Right.
from the very beginning. Just like as children, we're conditioned as we grow up for certain things culturally. That's very interesting. Just an idea of how I would go into that conversation as a birthing mother. I would be asking questions about what's medically indicating that I need an induction. What are the tests that run, and what are the labs? What should the labs say versus if they come back certain, what does that mean? Like for certain levels or values, what does that mean? Those are a couple of the questions that I would start to ask.
Right.
But if someone told me that in first trimester, first off, I'd be like, I'm out.
Well, and here's the thing that's so difficult about it is I don't think that it's clearly spoken. So, it would be posed something like this. So you're over 35. We consider that advanced maternal age, and this is your first baby. And so it may be stated something like this. There's a higher risk of the placenta failing, and so we recommend that you schedule an induction at 38 weeks. I don't really want you to go any later than 39 weeks. Holy crap! That just scared the crap out of me. You just said, like, there's something wrong with my body and it's going to fail and we need to save your baby in the first trimester.
And especially as a first-time birthing mother, that's scary.
It's so scary. That's a very simple statement that they made, but when I'm processing it as a new mom, I'm like, holy crap, this is intense, right? And so then you spend the next, 7 months wrapping your brain around, oh gosh, I have to have this induction. Oh my gosh, I have to have this induction. Yeah, my body is broken. My placenta is going to fail. I'm going to have to save my baby. Not necessary. Not 100% necessary.
No, because yes, there are medical indications that could pop up where you could see your placenta failing, but our bodies were created to have babies, or women's bodies were created to have babies. And we have generationally looking back, had children over the age of 35 for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Well, there is some science that says it's a little bit different for like a woman who's over 35 and she's having her first baby versus a woman who's over 35 and she's having her third baby. So the risks are less. So it's a very specific case, and there is a small increase in risk that does exist. But does it exist in first trimester? No. Do they have any tests that they have done to show you that is indicated? No. And I think that's the point, is like, yes, there is a potential that this could require an induction, but I don't know that we need to be discussing it or having decisions on it until we get to that place where we've looked at the placenta and we've determined that it's not functioning, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Allow your body and mind to relax. Let it take it through the first trimester, second trimester, get the data points if you want them, and then make that decision.
Yeah. And a woman should be able to enjoy this.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a stressful,
not
scary
so early
period of time. Not at all.
Another gray that I see a lot is providers who have been doing this for a very long time. So maybe they've been catching babies for 20 or 30 years. Oftentimes what I will notice is they don't really keep up on the data. They don't keep up on the science. And
it's a lot of work for providers to do that.
They don't have the time.
No,
they're actually booked back to back all the time. So if they're at work, they're literally doing something.
And then they're charting and noting. And I see what my husband brings home with all of his stuff that he has. They don't have time to
keep up with the data. And so what happens is, the data has evolved and the data has changed, and they are still operating and making decisions based on the old school stuff. And you really have to watch that then. As a woman getting your care, you really have to pay attention for yourself. Are they citing old research, old information? And is there new stuff out there that you can base your decision on? I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to do all of that, but in my opinion, sometimes doing that will keep you from having a lot of interventions that maybe you didn't want to have.
Yeah. Again, doing your research.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked a little bit about when induction does make sense in some of those medical scenarios, the preeclampsia, placenta failing, of course. Why is it important, and why should we be cognizant of considering, of prior to agreeing to non-medically necessary elective induction? Like, what are some things, like, why don't we want to have an induction?
Why not just sign up?
Why not just have an induction?
I mean, especially if you're feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And you're just like, I'm just ready to be done. I mean, it sounds so good.
1 week, or you hit your due date, like, wait, why hasn't baby come?
Yeah, right. It's summertime. It's hot. You're uncomfortable. Body hurts. You're just like, I'm ready. I'm just ready. Whatever. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. There are a couple of different scenarios. So I want to talk to the first-time mom first, because her body functions differently when it comes to birth than a woman who has given birth before. So for the first-time mama, I think you really need to understand that when I talk to women who are electing for an induction, they have this idea in their head that they are going to go into their induction. They say you have to come in at, like, I don't know, the evening, 8:00 at night. So they're thinking by the next morning, 8 in the morning, I'm going to have my baby in my hands. So they have like about a 12-hour window in their mind. Like, I'm going to go in and, give me about 1 day, and then I'm going to have my baby and it's going to be perfect. What a lot of women don't realize is for a first-time mom who doesn't have a medical issue. Now, if there's a medical issue where her body is sick, this is not true. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if she doesn't have a medical issue and she's having an induction, oftentimes that induction takes about 72 hours. That is the average, 72 hours. So be prepared for that first thing, right? Go in with the mindset that, okay, I'm not going in at 8 p.m. and I'm going to have my baby the very next morning. I'm going to go in at 8 p.m. and 3 days later, I'll finally have my baby. That's taxing. It's not
exhausting.
It's not just exhausting for your physical body, but like your emotional self. And quite honestly, who wants to hang out in the hospital too for 3 days, sitting in that bed, right? 3 days, just waiting.
For a medical reason, it's not fun.
It's awful. And what happens is people have not really wrapped their brain around it. And so they're sitting there and they're going through this induction, and the baby is not coming when they expected the baby to come. And so as providers are offering interventions, they're accepting the interventions because in their mind, this is going long. They're like, ooh, this should have only taken probably 12 hours.
So something's wrong.
Yes, something's wrong. And so, yes, I'll do that. 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 Even though there might be things that are uncomfortable, even though they might be things that they would not have accepted before, just because they've gotten either in the mindset that this is taking too long because of their expectations, or they're just antsy and fidgety and they're just like, I want to get out of here.
Get it done.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So they start accepting a lot of these interventions. So I think it's important to wrap your brain around the possibility that this could take a few days, not a few hours.
Mm-hmm. That's a realistic expectation.
It's a very realistic expectation. Also, once we start adding all of these pharmaceutical things that help us to induce a labor, these things can affect mom's body, they can affect baby's body. There is a higher probability of cesarean birth when we elect for induction. One thing to check out, if you're looking at the potential of an induction and you have a choice in the matter, meaning that it's not medically recommended or not medically needed, check out Bishop score. Bishop score.
I forgot about that. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So you can Google it. There is a set criteria, and it's based on a few things. And the lower the number, the higher the probability for cesarean birth. That means your body is not ready or primed and not favorable for induction.
And that has to do also with, if I remember correctly, the Bishop score takes into consideration where you are in your pregnancy as well, right?
I haven't looked at it in a long time. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be effacement, dilation, station, potentially gestational age. So all of these things will give you a final number, and that number will give you a good indication of what the probability of this induction turning into cesarean birth is, or what the probability of this induction being a vaginal birth.
Yeah, you mentioned most of them.
Okay.
Yep. As I'm looking it up. It's a really good point. And so if you're going in and you have a low bishop score, and you're not even effaced fully, your induction is going to be more challenging and more time-consuming, most likely, than...
More challenging, more time-consuming, and I quite honestly would recommend that you take a class on cesarean birth, or you talk to your doula about cesarean birth, because the lower that score is, the higher the probability of cesarean birth. Now, I'm not saying cesarean birth has to be bad. It can be beautiful, but you do need to be prepared for that. Like, just know that's what you're getting into.
Yeah, and can be the difference between an emergent cesarean versus a cesarean, where you can make the choice to have that.
Right.
And so talking a little bit about the process. So it essentially, you're saying that the cascade of interventions comes because of the 72 hours, the long, the long process. You go in and you medically are given Pitocin, for a medical pharmaceutical induction.
Right.
With Pitocin, let's talk a little bit about the difference in contractions with Pitocin versus your body's natural oxytocin of contractions.
Right. So the body creates a hormone called oxytocin. This thing is beautiful.
Happy hormone,
yes,
as we know it.
Yes, it's the love drug.
It's in labor, yeah.
Yes. It has a lot of functions. One of the functions, though, is to create contractions. Another function, though, is to give you that ooey gooey lovey feeling, which is nice, right? So your body is creating this hormone and you're having contractions, which are hard. But once that feeling of hardness goes away, you have love. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm just so excited to meet my baby. And you I know why I'm doing this, and it means a lot, and you feel good. Now, Pitocin.
Wait, let's talk about the shape of those contractions. And when I say shape, I'm looking at it on a graph.
Waves.
Yes, so it's like a wave. So imagine a wave going up, like a calm wave going up and then down, and having a nice arch up and down, up
so
and
like
down.
a rolling hill.
Yeah,
almost.
a rolling hill. Exactly. That's a great way to look at it. And now let's talk a little bit about Pitocin, and we'll talk about that shape.
So Pitocin is a man-made version of oxytocin. So this is created in the lab, and it's created in the lab to do the function of oxytocin in that it's trying to create contractions. It's missing some things. So one, the way it's administered is through an IV drip. And when we receive that into our body stops creating the oxytocin. The Pitocin, the synthetic version, it doesn't include the love. It only includes the contraction. So it's just the contraction minus the lovey feeling, it does make a difference. So it's
the
minus.
love is helping meet the challenge of the contraction.
Yes, there's a purpose and a reason, and you can feel it
in your body. It's your gift after each challenge that you've worked through. With the Pitocin on a graph, if you look at this, there's spikes. So it's a mountain. So
it's
up,
peaks.
Peaks, yeah.
Yep.
Up, down. You're not getting the nice flow rolling hills with valleys like you would.
Right. And oftentimes with Pitocin, the breaks are shorter and the peaks are stronger. And without Pitocin, just doing it naturally, the breaks are nice and wide, and the peaks are not sharp points on the graph. They are a nice rounded, kind of like a half moon. That makes a difference in the sensation of your experience, like what you feel in your body. We actually have a mama, she recorded one of our beautiful birth stories, who she really changed how I doulaed, because in her birth, she labored without Pitocin and she labored with Pitocin, and she did an amazing job of describing the difference that she felt physically within her body. So that's coming up in a few episodes. So stay tuned. It's Jen. So Miss Jen's beautiful birth story, and she describes the feeling, like the difference between the two. But anyway, one is super, super hard and intense, and one is actually doable. Here's what I will say also. I'm kind of veering off just a little bit, so bring me back. But your body can handle what it creates because it's you. Mm-hmm. It's you.
Mm-hmm. Only so, that's what it can handle.
Yes.
Because you've created it.
Yes.
Similar to just labor.
Yes.
And having a baby. You've created it.
You created it. It's doable. I mean, it's big. Don't get me wrong. It's not like it's not hard. It's hard. Mm-hmm. But it's not bigger than you because it is you. Mm-hmm. Now, Pitocin, that's not the case. That is a drug, my friend. And I have so many mamas who want to have an unmedicated birth, and they're very focused on the epidural when they're talking about unmedicated. But if you're having induction and you have Pitocin,
that's medicine.
And yes, it's medicine. It's pharmaceutical, and your body really cannot do a good job keeping up with it because it's actually stopped creating the pain coping drug that it creates to get through labor.
So it needs to be, but it's oftentimes nice to be met with another pain coping drug.
If you were having an induction and you were my client and I was your doula and you had Pitocin and you were like, I want to have a natural birth. I want to have a natural birth. You know what I would say? I was like, this is not natural.
Yeah.
And you need to fight fire with fire because I don't want you to come out of here with trauma. So many women who are trying to go through an induction with Pitocin without an epidural coming out like, oh my gosh, I know what it feels like to die. You're not meant to feel that. So yes, get the epidural. Mm-hmm. Get the epidural. You got to measure. You got to meet a pharmaceutical with a pharmaceutical.
Or fire with fire.
Fire with fire.
It's a really great description, because again, you're not getting that love. So in this case, your epidural might be your love.
And the love is what's helping you cope with this. Mm-hmm. Without it just doesn't work. It is broken. And ladies, oftentimes you'll be told, it's the same thing. It's the same as what your body produces. Some people will even refer to it as oxytocin. It's not oxytocin, it's Pitocin. It's synthetic. It's created in a lab, and it's missing the good stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It gets the job done.
Yeah, but it's missing the good stuff.
Sometimes
it doesn't even get the job done, though.
Sometimes.
To be realistic.
Is true.
And this is where the cascade comes in. So you have the Pitocin, and then you have the epidural. And for more information around some of the stuff that then happens post-epidural, some of the, just the considerations to take into effect, go back to our episodes. We have a couple of them on epidurals.
Yeah.
I think. At least we have one good one on epidurals. But go back, listen to that, and just inform yourself on what that looks like for you so that you're prepared in both your body and your mind for this.
Right.
So Pitocin is the drug for the pharmaceutical that comes into play with induction. But we hear about a couple of other things. Let's talk a little bit about those. So Foley bulb, membrane sweep.
Let's go back to pharmaceuticals. There are a couple more pharmaceuticals, actually.
Okay.
So Pitocin opens.
Yep.
That just opens the cervix.
Yep.
But before we open the cervix, we have to thin.
Yeah, the effacement.
Yes, effacement.
That's what effacement is.
Right. And so if we are not at least 70% effaced, then we cannot use Pitocin yet. And so there are some strategies that are utilized to get us to that place. Two pharmaceuticals are heavily used. One is Cervidil and one is Cytotec. Mm-hmm. These are little pills. They sometimes are inserted as a pill. Sometimes they're ground up into a powder and they're inserted vaginally. Sometimes they're given orally. Either way, they affect every woman differently. Some women will have a very big, strong reaction to them. Some women will have nothing.
Mm-hmm. One of my friends just had Cytotec, and that's all she needed.
And that got her. That just launched her into labor.
It was her second labor, and she was very very mentally and emotionally prepared for an induction for the second time with her baby. And I think that she also just manifested it upon herself for it to work. And she had an amazing birth.
Vaginal or oral, do you know?
I don't know. I'm hoping we get her on the show at some point in time.
My guess is vaginal. So my experience so far has been vaginal is usually going to give a bigger experience.
That would make sense.
Oral is a lot more subtle.
2 different methods. One is going through your gut barrier and one is going through your skin, tissue, blood.
Right.
Barrier. Yeah.
Right. It's almost like it would be similar to putting it under your tongue and absorbing it through your tongue, but you're doing that in your vagina, basically, is what's happening.
Yeah. So anyways, so those are 2. And so we haven't talked about this in depth in birth, but B mentioned effacement, and then we mentioned dilation. We always hear about dilation. But first you have to efface, which means it thins the layer out, and then it opens.
And then it opens.
The Cytotec and Cervidil are thinning it out.
Right.
Okay.
One or the other. So they would choose one or the other. But where you were headed a minute ago is there are some other methods. These are not as commonly offered, but
this is B's secret menu. She always talks about.
Yeah, they should be offered. It's definitely one of my pet peeves that it's not something that is provided as an option. But
it's cheaper.
It's more controlled. You know exactly what you're going to get from it.
It's not coming from a pharmaceutical company either.
Here's the thing about the Cytotec and the Cervidil is once it's placed, you're going on this ride. And we don't know what this ride is going to look like for you, but there's no turning back. Like, it is what it is. You're going to have to see it to the end. Another option is a non-pharmaceutical, and it's called a Foley bulb catheter. Did we talk about this recently?
Nope.
No, okay. It's called a Foley bulb it was in Meg's birth story.
Oh, yes. Yeah, yes. We did. Okay, so if you go back to Meg's birth story, she actually had an amazing experience with her induction with a Foley bulb.
She did a Foley bulb induction. And so it's a little balloon that's inserted into the vagina. Now, here's the key, ladies. You got to remember this. You have to be at least 1 centimeter dilated. You can't put something up in the cervix if it's not open, right?
That would make sense.
Right. So
I never even thought about that
one important detail.
Because you have to stretch. You're trying to stretch it again, but you have to also be effaced then.
A little bit effaced.
Yep, at least 70% still, or do you know? Okay,
no, you can be like as little as 30%, as long as there's an opening there that they can slide this little balloon in, and it's little at the beginning. But then what they do is they add a saline solution into the balloon, and the balloon starts to mimic a baby head, putting pressure on the cervix. That pressure, yes, it's not comfortable.
Making a face over here. Ooh, that's interesting.
She's like, oh yes, I just remembered birth.
Yeah.
So it's not the most comfortable, but it's not any less comfortable than being in labor, and that's where we're headed, right? So
it'll stimulate contractions.
It stimulates contractions, and it will cause. Ideally, it will cause the cervix to thin. And the idea is that the cervix will begin to thin and dilate. Usually we can get to about 70% effaced and 3 centimeters open with the Foley bulb. The nice thing about it is there's no side effects. It can be taken out. You know, if you're uncomfortable and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore, they can stop it, right? Which not necessarily what you want to do. But.
And B mentioned a word. This is in an ideal situation. This happens. So, just genuine question here. Why is it only 3 centimeters? Like, what do you do after the 3 centimeters?
It falls out.
And then your intent is that you start
Pitocin.
Starting labor on your own, or you're starting Pitocin.
Well,
so you would choose this over Cervidil or
Cytotec. Mm-hmm. Okay.
There
is another option. So typically what's offered in the hospital is going to be Pitocin. That's the next step. Let's start. Now we're at a place where we're effaced enough. Let's start opening the cervix so that we can get baby out. Mm-hmm. There is another option which Jen talks about in her birth story too. Another option is instead of the Pitocin, you can use a breast pump. Now,
I did this. But
you did it.
Mm-hmm. We used a breast pump, and Yeah, keep going.
It's a midwife tool. This is something that would be used if for some reason labor is slowing or stalled. What I will say about that, just a quick little note, typically if it's not an induction and labor is slowed or stalled, it's probably because baby's in a funky position, just to note. That's the problem, most likely. Or mom is really exhausted, or mom is dehydrated or needs food. But aside from that, nipple stimulation, a really good strong nipple stimulation. I'm not talking like a little tweak. I'm like, get the breast pump on there and get it going. This will cause contractions. You do want to do this supervised. So I'm telling you guys stuff that you probably should do under the care of a midwife or an OB, but this is an option that you can bring up.
Yeah, even you could bring your pump into the hospital and ask to do this before Pitocin, if that's appropriate for you medically.
Yeah, that's exactly what we did in Jen's birth. So we talked to the nurse, and we said that this is what we would like to try, and we got permission. And within the hospital, in labor and delivery, this is what we did to get her labor going.
Cool. Okay, very, very cool. And another one that comes up often is a membrane sweep. Let's talk a little bit about that, and then I'll weigh in on a little bit of it too.
So
I think, and this is me with my experience of speaking with so many people and learning, but membrane sweeps are often done when you're approaching, I don't want to call it a risk, an outlook of induction based off of timing. I find a lot of people do that because maybe their provider is saying, if you're not in labor by 41 and 5 or 41 and 6, let's do an induction. And so one of the first things offered oftentimes is a membrane sweep to that. Or for women that are birthing, like when there are some legal hoops to jump through, you must go into labor 42 weeks in one day. So they're doing the membrane sweep to not hit that date necessarily.
Yeah.
So what is a membrane sweep?
A membrane sweep is you would go into your provider's office, and it's very similar to doing a vaginal exam. When they're in there doing that vaginal exam, they're going to use their finger, and they're going to sweep their finger between the membrane and kind of do a little bit of a separation. It doesn't feel good. It's uncomfortable. It's very common for there to be spotting afterwards. So if you did elect to do this, don't freak out if you see blood. That's very common. The idea is that hopefully this would cause contractions, and then those contractions would just continue on, and labor would start on its own. I have seen, in my experience, this is not very effective. I've heard
that too from most of my friends. It also sometimes elongates your labor. So then you go in and out for hours and hours, which can
you get tired.
It can be so exhausting. And so with everything that we mentioned, there are risks and benefits and different things to consider. And one of the risks too with the membrane sweep that is listed is infection.
Yeah.
I mean, everything has risks and benefits.
Yeah.
So again, sometimes, and I just want to reiterate this overall for everything, when it's not medically indicated, your body sometimes just needs time. Like, it doesn't want to be forced. The baby got in there. Baby's going to get out of there. But every woman and every pregnancy is different.
I get that. They're like, at the end, you're just kind of like, this is who I am now. I am this woman who is pregnant. This is me.
I'm going to be pregnant forever.
Forever and ever. There's no baby. It's just me being pregnant.
And I honestly can't have felt that because Oliver came at 39 weeks. But I mean, I don't know what I would feel like at 42.
It's just like every hour over 40, you're like, when's it going to happen? Yeah. And then like if you happen to get to 41, by the way, ladies, first time moms, what is average if there is no intervention for a first-time mom is actually 41 weeks and 3 days. So if you could just take out of your head 40 and put in your head 41 weeks and 3 days, meaning everybody's going to go over 10 days. Mm-hmm. I think it'll save a lot of angst.
In hypnobirthing, you train your mind to expect 42.
Yeah, there you go.
Like I wouldn't, with Oliver, I lied about my due date, and I'm proud about it. So then when
For
Oliver
yourself?
came early, yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's like, oh my gosh. I'm like, he's not early. He's not that early.
Yeah.
But that's another thing too, and I love calling it a guest date.
Yes.
I think a due date is it's the wrong term.
I would like to call it a birth month.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what I tell people. I'm like, between this and between this. And it's an entire month. And then everyone's like up in arms. Like, wait, what? Like, I don't really know. What?
Because you don't get in your head and you're not like holding your breath and you're like, wait, is that it? Is that it? You know, I have a lot of mamas who will ask like, well, how will I know? Like, if I don't, like, how?
You'll feel it.
You'll know. Mm-hmm. You absolutely won't miss that.
Even with midwives I've spoken to, when they've looked at calculating due dates, they'll do the old school, like, spinner thing, or if you have an idea, especially of your conception date, and then be like, end of August.
Yes.
But not even tell you necessarily what they think it is. I love that.
I love that too.
I think that's fascinating. And I think that it's a wonderful way to also prepare you for motherhood.
Right. Because there's nothing set in stone. Right.
In general. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've covered, there are a couple of other alternatives. I mean, like, acupuncture is huge.
You know, it's called moxibustion. I haven't.
No, it's not just that's flipping breech.
Yes.
Acupuncture, they will actually do treatments that are
induction acupuncture.
Yeah. And,
yes.
If I had to go this far, that was something that I was considering. And you'll sit down in a chair, and it's not the most. She warns you, it's not the most comfortable. They use e-stim as well with it to just get your body to release. You start hitting the release points.
There's also a form of acupuncture that is, it's not induction, but it's like, let's tell the body, let's get ready. Yeah. We have a provider here in Colorado Springs who actually puts little, tiny little needles that stay in for like a week.
In the ears or
and
where
the
else?
feet,
and the
toes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting.
Not where you're stepping, but yeah, like on the sides.
Oh,
the ladies say that it doesn't feel bad, like it's not bothering them, but I have seen it actually really do a good job.
But again, that's a very gentle way to tell your body they stay in for a week. Mm-hmm. You aren't expecting to go like this. Mm-hmm. It can take, I think even when I was planning it, she told me that it's not going to put me into an immediate, like a labor if my body's not ready for it.
Right.
It will stimulate the body's desire and like working to make it happen.
So I think the idea is that it should be about 7 to 14 days. Mm-hmm. Like it's slow and gentle, but just kind of getting your body kind of acclimated and prepared.
Mm-hmm. And you can do acupuncture throughout your entire pregnancy to get it prepared as you go.
Yes.
And to help with baby's growth.
Yes.
And development.
There's a ton to talk about on induction. Like there's so many different forms and modes and details, and we really just scratched the surface. So if you are being posed with that option for whatever reason, do a little investigation, ask a lot of questions, and sometimes I know it happens that somebody mentions induction at this appointment and you're just kind of like, whoa, and your brain turns off and you leave and you're kind of spinning. Don't worry about the fact that you didn't get all your questions in that appointment. Your brain is spinning for the next couple of weeks. Write down all those questions.
Brain. Yeah. Ask the benefits. Ask the risks. Look up alternatives. Use your intuition when it really comes down to it.
Yes.
Sometimes
check
doing
in
nothing.
Check in with yourself about doing nothing. And just take them to the next appointment and figure these things out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so I hope from this episode you were able to gain a little bit of understanding about induction, what it is, how common it is in the U.S., some of the various types, and how you can be informed and empowered to dig and do a little bit of your own research and make choices in that regard.
And just so you know, induction doesn't mean bad.
No.
That's not what we're saying here. There's a lot of beautiful birth stories that were an induction. Meg's was a beautiful birth story that was an induction.
On here that has her induction too.
Jen's was an induction, and it was a beautiful story. So please understand, we're not saying induction bad. We're saying know the info before you make your decision.
Yep, exactly. As in everything that we say.
Yes.
Know your info on both sides.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again.
All right. Until next time.